Yeah, I'd be glad to let you know how I happened to end up here in Weirs Beach, New Hampshire, instead of Chicago, Illinois. My mother got married and moved to Ohio, where my brother was born, and then a year and a half later I was born. And the family moved to Chicago, and when I was 2 years old, my mother got a divorce and moved back to Lowell. My grandfather had a house right on the lake in the Weirs, next to Irwin's Winnipesaukee Gardens. And so I spent all my summers there from the time I was 2 years old. And I went to Norwich University from 48 to 52, graduated with a degree in chemistry, but decided I wasn't going to be a chemist because it would be too boring for me. So I happened to go with some friends to Barrie one night to a place, and they had an indoor mini golf in there. And I had a good look at it, and I got thinking I'd like to put one of these in the Weirs someplace. And so I came home in the next weekend or two, and this was the spring of '52, and found a place, made a deal with the owner, and rented the second floor of Towson's Arcade with 6,000 square feet, and got my brother, and we built an indoor mini golf, and we opened on June 27th. And that first weekend we opened, we were packed. We had people going out the door trying to get in at 35 cents a round. That summer, we had $2,900 in income, which was quite a bit of money in 1952. Pretty good start for us. And we had a fellow that year put in half a dozen coin-operated machines, 50-50. The old Shuffle Alley, baseball game, rifle gallery, and pinballs. And that was it for that year. And then the second year, I bought out the other guy that was in partnership with me and took my brother into it. And we started buying our own machines. That was in '53. And the problem in the Weirs there was very limited parking, a total of 400 spaces in the whole Weirs, with no hope of the city adding any more parking spaces. So we started looking for land, and we found this 21 acres here. Fortunately, in the same transaction, we were able to sell 2 acres on the south side, which had 5 cabins and a house, which we didn't even want. Total cost of the property was $16,000, and we sold that 2 acres for $12,000. So we ended up with 19 acres here for $4,000, and we had very little money. I started the business with a loan from my grandmother of $750. I didn't have any money, and so we built this mini golf first in a small building, which is where the restaurant is now, and just started developing here. We ran both places for several years, and then I finally sold the place in the Weirs to my brother and his son Randy, because I was too busy up here running this, just summers, because I worked for the telephone company as an engineer, and my brother John worked for the state and child and family services, so we were both very busy. And on building the mini golf out here, which was our first big attraction, we had someone start building it for us, and they weren't doing a good job, so we ended up building it ourselves. We used extra labor to help us with it, but we were only able to open that first year on August 1st, 1964, instead of July 1st. We both took our vacation so we could work and get the mini golf going. We just kept developing here any way we could. We put in a little play area for kids because we recognized that toddlers can't play the mini golf, and mothers with toddlers got to have something to do. The next year we put in the pool room with 7 Brunswick tables, and I opened every night. The next thing we built was we doubled the size of the pool room and put in slot car tracks. Those did well for us until maybe about 75 or 6. There was an operator who ran games down in Concord and had a grocery store there and everything, and he came in one day, and I was working at the counter all we had was a mini golf and a few of the older mechanical type games. And he came in and started waving his arms around and said, let me get rid of this junk for you and put in some good games. He had games in colleges, in the winter, and then he had nothing to do with them in the summer. We were only open summers at that time, so I said, okay, go ahead. First game he put in was Tank. It was a 2 players. At that time, we were getting a dime for the games that we had. This game cost you a quarter for each person that played it, so that was 50 cents if 2 people were playing. So we knew what direction this business was going to go in. It was going to go in with video games. And then we added Seawolf and Indy 4, both games which we still have. And those games took in far more than anything we had. Seawolf was generating $90 a day for the summer, and Indy 4 averaged $140 a day. And those were big figures in the mid-70s, and exceeded any expectations we had with the other type of electromechanical games, or rifle galleries, pinballs, baseball games, and things like that. So we let him start putting all kinds of games in. We started taking out pool tables and putting in games. I had distributors in Massachusetts keeping their eyes open for old games for me because I couldn't afford to buy any new games, and I was only open summers, so I couldn't spend much on a game. But one of them notified me of a deal in Revere Beach. A guy wanted to get rid of all the games he had down in his cellar. So we went down and looked at it and went to the door. There's no doorknob on the door. He banged on the door, and the guy opens the door, and I tell him who I am. So he leads me into the room with this guy, and it was a blind fellow that owned it. And I told him what I wanted, and so he sent a guy with me, and we looked in the cellar, and there must have been a couple of hundred games in there. It was unbelievable. And I'm talking antiques. And he had been there for 50 years at that time. This was in mid-60s. He had been there for 50 years, and whenever a game wasn't making any more money, he'd stick it down in his cellar and get the latest game, of course, as you have to in this business. And so we looked at it, and I came back and said, I'll give you $250 for anything I want. And the reason was that he was going to have to pay a truck to haul the games to a dump at $50 a load. So he was glad for someone to take whatever they could, And he said, okay. So we got a bunch of guys in a truck, and a few of us, and we went down and loaded up. We got 38 games out of there, one of which was a grandmother machine, which we ran here for years. And so where that first pool table was, we put an antique arcade. And we had these games in it, including the grandmother. And we sold the grandmother several years ago for $50,000. So, and the other games that we got right now, they'd be worth at least that. And that grandmother was the best grandmother I ever saw in the world, and it's probably worth $250,000 today. But that's the way it was, In those days, people you only wanted a game that would make you some money, and that's what we were doing. We weren't thinking about these as antiques. We were thinking about these, we can make a dime on them. And so as the video games developed, we decided to put an edition on, which is, we call the 86 edition because of when it was put in. And it's the one you come up the stairs from level 1 to 2. It's a 2-story edition we put on there, just for video games. and we went to the bank to borrow $230,000, and they turned us down. And my brother had worked for the state, and he came up Friday nights and would work for the weekend. And I worked for the telephone company, but I was around here more. And I said, we're going to do it anyway. So when he got up here Friday night, the cellar hole was all dug for that addition, where we put in almost 100 games in that building, and we paid for that building with those new games that summer, $230,000. That's the way the video game business was in those mid 70s to 90. It was just, you couldn't keep people out of here. And then in 87 we put the kiddie room in because we wanted to get the bumper cars that are in the middle of that room now. We used to have them outdoors, and that was a bit of a problem when it rained and everything. So we went to the bank and they gave us the money for that, and we built that big kiddie room there. And then in 88 we went and did the biggest thing here, and that's the bowling center here, which cost us about $850,000, and the bank gave us the money for that because they could see what the trend was, and each one of those we did, we were adding about 100 more games. And that's how we ended up through 88 with over 500 games. We always said that we want Funspot to be so big that nobody's going to be able to compete with us. During the video boom in the 80s, everybody was opening a video place. Any empty store in any city would have video games in it. And the video game boom ended for us in 1990, and we just didn't know what we were going to do in 90 because home games got better. Up until then, they weren't worth playing, but they got so good, so we just had to expand anytime we could. The competition was growing around us, even though it was temporary. The industry went from $5 billion to $2 billion inside of 2 years. But we had enough variety here with the mini golf, with the prize games, with pinball machines and stuff like that, that we were able to hang on. But we didn't know what we were going to do in 90. And in 96, we decided to convert our shop into a bingo hall. And that's a state-authorized charity bingo. The charities run the games. We just charge them depending on the number of people at the game. In that same year, we had to build a shop up back. We only could do it a half at a time because we didn't have the money. But now it's double, and that's our workshop up there and for all our equipment and everything. Also, that same year, the bowling alley over in Guilford was taken over by the bank because they couldn't make their mortgage payment. So league bowlers over there came to me one day right here in this bowling center and said, we'd like to run our leagues over here. We never had leagues. We didn't want leagues. We just wanted open bowling. But by that time we needed money, so I said, sure. What do you need? First thing they said was a tavern. And that's where we're sitting right now. And so we had to do some work on our lanes, put this tavern in, and build the bingo hall and a shop all that year. So I can tell you we were hurting by the end of that year. That was 96. And then in 98, we used to have a Monday morning meeting where half a dozen or 8 or 10 of us would get together and talk about things. At the end of the meeting, I'd always say, anybody got anything else? And Gary, of course, Vincent was always at that meeting, and Gary said, I think we ought to save all of the old video games that we have and put them all in one room and have a museum. So we agreed to do that, and so we had to do some work to get that ready and to floor in some more places and stuff. So, and we put the tavern in that same year, and so that's how things developed here. And then, of course, outdoors, the mini golf was still running since '64, And in '66, we had put in a golf driving range, which we closed years ago. And then the people that run monkey trunk zip lines came to us and said they wanted to put one here at Funspot. So we spent some time dealing with them and worked out a deal. So they opened the 1st of July, because they had to do all the building and everything at that time. And it's a beautiful structure they got there, zip lines, and they're putting zip lines over our pond down there, which we're hoping to someday maybe get a hotel in there. And the pond would make a nice addition for that. We have a fountain in it and a spillway that runs water into it, so it's a very attractive place. They are going to be open every night too, which they haven't done before, of course, but they got the okay, and we've had a good time with them, and I think they bring people in here. So that's basically how things have gone here, and that's about the history, I guess, so far, with a lot of other things I can tell you about, but we go on forever.
Actually, I've started working at Funspot in the summer of 1981. It was supposed to be a 3-week job filling in at the end of the summer. I always joke that 3 weeks aren't over yet. ACAM, which is the American Classic Arcade Museum, it was an idea I had in 1998 and presented to Bob Lawton. And Bob is also a big history buff, as he and his son Tim had started the Lake Winnipesaukee Historical Society in 1986. And, we've developed now to the point where we have about 300 games in the museum that are all 1988 and older. And the purpose of it is to provide an interactive, or like I like to call it, an immersive environment where when people step into the museum area, there's nothing in there that is newer than 1988. Everything that's on the wall, all the displays in the display cases, the games themselves, the music that plays, all of it is period appropriate. If you were somehow transported in there and all of a sudden woke up, you would think it was the 1980s again. And it was just, I guess, pay tribute to the history of video games that sparked what is now an enormous industry, but also give people who maybe didn't experience arcades then or are too young now to have experienced them, that chance to come in and get a feel of where it started, what made it so exciting, and be able to spend some time there to relive that part of Americana. I was approached by a gentleman, and he stuck his hand out and he said, "I just want to thank you," as we were shaking hands. And I said, "Thank me for what?" And he said, "Well, I have my son with me. My son had no idea what an arcade was like. His idea of something that's antique and classic is a PlayStation 1. He said, "I grew up in arcades, and I've been trying to tell him, they were these great places we used to go to as kids, and they were filled with arcade games." And he said, "But, you can tell someone that story, but having nothing to relate it to, it didn't mean anything to his son until he brought him into the exhibit that we had set up and was able to spend, an hour or so in there playing games that he knew how to play better than his son did." If you look at video games, you can compare it to probably most other businesses or hobbies. Like when a game first comes out, the games in the 80s, they were popular. This is the latest hit. Then they become filler games in an arcade where, it's still making some money, but the business says, all right, we can leave it there. It's still somewhat profitable. Then it turns into junk, is basically what people would say. They're like, oh, look at that old junk. And then they become collectible because people will want to save them for personal use. And then, they become antique or valuable. And I think you can probably apply that to a lot of things, even automobiles. A car's new, then it's old, then it's junk, and then it's collectible, and now they're on Barrett-Jackson auction for $200,000. So that's kind of a phase that I saw the games going through. And unfortunately, what happened is when you reach the junk phase, then the game was junked, and most places would rent a dumpster, and if you smash the cabinet up into little pieces, you can get more of them into the dumpster, so you don't have to spend as much money getting rid of the item that no longer is profitable for you. But you have to think back when this was happening. There was no internet. There wasn't any eBay to sell these on. So if you wanted to get rid of a game, you put an ad in the local newspaper. And if nobody came and bought it, well, you had to get rid of it because you didn't want to keep paying either, rent space you were renting to store something that wasn't making any money. So, of course, now, people say, oh, they should have just held on to it. Well, sometimes that does happen. You will come across a big root operator who happened to own a building free and clear and didn't really have any need to get rid of anything, so they just threw it in a storage building. And collectors are still finding these warehouses today. And you'll see it on a lot of the game collector forums. We're going on a warehouse raid this weekend, and they'll stumble across places that have 200 games that have just been sitting there in a time warp for 25 years. The first commercially available video game that anybody could go to their distributorship and buy was Computer Space, made by Nutting Associates. The game came in 4 different colors. There was red, yellow, blue, and green, and we have the red Metal Flake cabinet upstairs, single player.
We took our boat that we bought in 1960 for $100, and I watched American Restoration Show and said, maybe we can get on the show. And so we did contact them, and they did accept us, and he restored it. And it's amazing to me the number of people that come in here since we put it in and have seen Rick's restoration and come here just to see this boat and have their kids ride in it and tell me that they rode in it when they were the age of their kids now. It's wonderful for me because this is my life, this has been my life for 60 years. I'm 81, so I started when I was 21, but this is just wonderful to be able to talk to people that came here 50 years ago or something and rode in this boat, and you can't beat it. It's wonderful. I love it.
Since it's so big, you have to kind of keep your eyes out because sometimes you find tokens on the floor. Oh, jeez. This game is not reflective of my denomination. It's just a name. Better safe than sorry, though, right? Check out the theme song. Ready? Flight of the Valkyrie. You know it as Elmer Fudd, Kill the wabbit, ha ha ha.
The first time I came to Funspot was probably about, say, 8 years ago, and I remember walking through the front doors and being completely blown away when you turn the corner. This brought back so many memories of my early childhood. And it was amazing. And I hadn't even met these other guys yet, so I came back a few more times. And then there was this one time I was playing one of my favorite games called Gyrus, and it was late at night, and I thought there was nobody in the arcade, so I was just screwing around. And then the regulars come out of the woodworks. It's like they repelled out of the ceiling or something like that. And they're like, "Hey, that's a really good score. We play regularly. Would you like to join our group?" And I said, "Sure, that'd be loads of fun." And now it's 8 years later, and I made a ton of new friends. They're some of the best friends that I have. And we have this wonderful love of video games in common. So it's home, it's family, it's familiar, and and I'm so glad that it's here.
First heard of another place in New Hampshire called Pinball Wizard. They're the ones who told us about this place. And I saw this documentary called The King of Kong, which was pretty hilarious. And they had a big scene that took place here, and I didn't realize it was that close to Maine.
Yes, past probably 10 years pretty seriously here. Probably, as I say, 3 times a week. And days like these, where I get better, it takes a long time for me to use a token, so it's great. It's very cost effective. There will be times where I'll spend 4 hours here and spend $2. So that's, entertainment value. That's a pretty good bang for your buck. And, practice makes perfect, but nobody's perfect.
And we came here because we're also doing research. We're thinking about starting up our own pinball, arcade, bar kind of thing.
If you're going to start a business, you've got to have the will to work at it. You have to have an idea, talk it over with people that you trust, and then research it, because if it's been done before, it may be good for you, just like seeing that indoor mini golf in Barry, Vermont in 1952, which is what started this whole thing. And if I hadn't gone there that night, I guess none of us would be sitting here right now talking about this.
Probably my favorite moments are every year when we have the tournaments. That's the best, because then you have people from all over the world come. The money's not so great. I think they give away like $750 a year. So it's not so much about the money; it's about the pride. I'm the king of classic gaming. That sounds so nerdy, doesn't it?
Some have said that it's more like Christmas to them than actual Christmas.
Yes. Yeah.
They look forward to that tournament week and seeing everybody, hanging out with all the friends, coming from Canada and Australia. We've had a guy, England.
Yeah.
Each year we host a classic game tournament. When I first started working for Funspot in the summer of '81, they had already been doing tournaments and pinball leagues, video game of the week contests, video game tournaments as a way to keep people coming into the business and keep them as repeat customers. That foundation was already set in place. So we started our first classic tournament in 1999. It was kind of a test, but also a continuation of what had been done here on site anyway. And we've had people from Israel, Finland, Holland, England, Ireland, I think every province of Canada, almost every state in the United States, and we even have a gentleman who's been here 3 times already from Australia. So you would never get that coverage or find that support base of people who, appreciate what you're doing without the internet. So it's kind of a mix of old and new, where you have the new technology is helping you save the old technology.
It was such a major part of my childhood. I was the first one in my little area to get ColecoVision when it came out, and I was just hooked. All my other friends had Atari, which I thought stunk. The graphics were horrible, and I got ColecoVision. Like, this is awesome. There's Donkey Kong and Frontline and all the cool games that you couldn't get on Atari. And the graphics totally blew it away. And once that craze kind of wrapped up, arcade games kind of left my life. You grow up. But now, I'm nearing 40 years old, and I see these arcade games, and it kind of just gives me a chance to revisit my childhood.
I play games because I grew up in this town. I remember Funspot when it was, when I was 2 feet off the ground, and, looking up at these amazing machines where it was nothing but, Pac-Man and Space Invaders and some of the old antique games, and I've watched this building grow through my whole life. So you just you grow up next to this, you can't help but not become a video gamer.
I think I like problem solving. That's just something I like to do, and as opposed to playing Scrabble and that boringness, I like visual entertainment.
I don't have a really good answer other than I love games. I've always loved games. The first games that I started playing were card games when I was a little kid. As a matter of fact, before I learned how to read, I learned how to say the cards in the deck. So it's something, gaming is in my family, like in the roots.
I was into Atari for a little while. My friend had it. And then just kind of all of a sudden I lost interest. I think it had something to do with coming here and, playing the real games, with the joystick and the fire button. And this is too much for me with the thumbs and all the double, oh, jeez, I want a fire and I want a shield or something, really simple.
The arcade in my town at the time was called McBoogle's. It's no longer there. And to be honest with you, arcades are really a dying phenomenon. You can't find them anymore. So when I heard that there was a place like this place is by far the biggest arcade I've ever seen. The games work, they're clean, they're a quarter. People haven't jacked up the price to $1 per game. So far my experience here has been great.
I used to go to them a lot in the 80s, and they were really cool. The big difference between Funspot and the other arcades that I remember is that, this is more geared towards families and little kids, right? But when I was a little kid growing up, the primary people in the arcades were teenagers, and I was this little dinky 4-year-old kid wanting to play the games, and they were surprisingly tolerant of this. And so I remember playing a game like Pole Position, and I was too little to reach the pedals, and I was too uncoordinated to do the stick shift. So this 15, 16-year-old kid used to come and help do that for me, and he was really encouraging. And also, a lot of people come here too for the nostalgia. Like, they hear about this place and they're like, oh man, classic video games, that sounds like right up my alley. And so you always see, parents bring their kids here, but the parents always come up here to play some of the games that they remember and loved when they were in high school or even younger. And their kids are standing around like, Mom, I want to get going, I want to go ride the rides downstairs. And they're like, just one more game, Johnny, let me play one more,
It's hard for us not to be biased. We've grown up with this, but yeah, it is the largest arcade in the world. It's got more classic games than any other place in the world. Granted, it's certainly been hard to keep an arcade profitable since the mid-'80s.
And then mid-2000s, Gary Vincent from the American Classic Arcade Museum actually made the American Classic Arcade Museum a nonprofit organization, which helps to keep all this stuff going.
As far as donors to the museum, there are a handful of people that have given us numerous games. And it's amazing to see that there is a broad base of people from all over who love what we're doing with the museum and are willing to, go to the expense of buying a machine and then having it shipped here, which is very expensive. On average, a game will cost you $400 to $500 just in shipping to get it somewhere from the continental U.S. to here.
Machines break. They do. And these guys have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of machines to look after. These guys are working every single day, fixing machines, just to keep everybody happy. I mean, you can have...
Sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, the machines are 30 years old, and there's so many things that come up with them. You go to other places like the beach, they may have a lot of classic arcade games, but none of them work. Nothing works.
Technology changes over time. For example, the nutting computer space we have upstairs. The monitor in that game is actually a television set. And it's a 1970, 1971 vintage television that still has vacuum tubes in it. And we still have it running that way. There are some people who have ones, they've swapped them out for newer technology, but we're just trying to keep it as authentic as possible. And then you have, the video games that were made during the boom years or the golden years, as people refer to, are all running TTL logic in them, which is also an obsolete technology now. And all of those games were also running CRT monitors, which you cannot even buy anymore. So the problem you run into is parts availability. And what we end up doing is finding people who have stored away circuit boards that were no good and picking components off of those that are still functioning. That's the biggest problem that we face with the preservation of classic games, is keeping the technology the same so that you're preserving it rather than building a replica or emulating a system from the old days.
My favorite game of all time, I would have to say, is a computer game that I played a long time ago. It's a role-playing game called Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar.
Mine is Congo Bongo.
It's too hard to pick,
I love Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., Centipede, Pole Position. And there was a game called Ladybug. I don't know if they have that here or not. I'm going to check that out. Ladybug was a ColecoVision game that was really popular that I really fell in love with.
I don't know. Not Blueprint, no. I happen to hold a world record on a particular game that I hate. Don't ask me how that happened. I was forced to play it in a tournament, and
He excelled.
yeah, it was a rotten game. It's a game called Blueprint, and I just think it's dumb. It's just like any of his other games. I just think it kind of has a dumb look and feel to it. I just don't like it.
Oh, right here. Definitely this best game. Best part of the game is trapping the figures there in a very, very confined space. And then you separate them. Wonder if the maker of the game had any separation anxiety.
You might go to a show once a year and see 100 new video games. Well, if you can only buy 10, you better be careful what 10 you're buying. So many of us used to go and we would very carefully test games and get together and see. And I liked Rally X immediately, and it's been a very popular game at all about Funspot. We used to have a Rally X high score on all the games, and anybody got 100,000, you'd get a roll of tokens and that sort of thing. So, and Kiss is my favorite pinball, and I play several of the old games, but that's about it.
When I was very young, both of my parents worked, so when I got out of school, they had arranged for me to go over to a family friend's house for a few hours every day after school until Mom got out of work and could pick me up. And they had Atari 2600. So I would play Atari every day after school for 3 or 4 hours every single day. I was perfect. I was a great babysitter for that. She didn't have to do anything. The Atari took care of me. That's what started it all for me.
First game I remember playing was actually here, and it was Congo Bongo. Maybe that's why I'm so attached to it now. I remember just barely being able to reach the controls and playing, and now I hold the world record on it. So.
I can remember my first video game love. I got a ColecoVision, if you've ever heard of that. It was sort of like an Atari knockoff. My parents got me that when I was about 3 and a half. And my favorite game on that was the Smurfs. Because like every little kid growing up in the 80s, you loved the Smurfs.
Probably the Pac-Man on the Atari.
Yes.
Sorry. That's what my mom wanted to play.
My parents bought us, and I think this was probably around 1980, Panasonic put out an arcade game called Odyssey. And it was a very basic console. It had a keypad in the front. I think it was one of the very first arcade games you could bring into your home, one of those consoles. It preceded ColecoVision, Atari, and even the Activision stuff that came later.
You know, honestly, I was always against tattoos. I think I'm never going to get a tattoo. It'll be on you forever, but I don't know. I was on vacation with some friends in Florida, and they were thinking of getting tattoos, and I'm like, I don't know, just it wasn't then and there. Just slowly my view changed about tattoos, and it's always, you know, if I can find something that, you know, really represents me, that I'm not going to mind wearing on my body forever. I'm like, you know, I don't think I'm ever not going to be a video gamer. And yeah, the Atari joystick means a lot to me. It's definitely what got my start in video games. Yeah, I'm happy to have that on me forever.
Getting started, I think the best thing about it was that my brother and I worked together. He was pretty much the financial man, and I was the idea man. And so that really worked good, because I'd say, why don't we put an addition on here or something? And he'd say, where are we going to get the money? You don't want to just try to inflate figures and go to the bank and try to fool the bank into giving you a loan. You want to make sure in your own mind that it's going to be profitable for you. And we did that, and everything we've done has been profitable. We opened Storybook Forest, we opened Indian Village. We loved them. They did well, but they only ran Memorial Day to Labor Day, and they were too much labor and replenishing and reworking and everything every year. So we eventually closed both of those, particularly when video games came in towards the late 70s. That's where the money was. The business went from video games, which were huge all over the country. So now the business is 80% prize games, ticket games, where people win tickets and get prizes, because people want to win prizes. No matter how technology develops, you're not going to have prizes in your home games. But when something new comes along, we're going to look at it. We keep track of the industry with trade magazines, and I go to Disney World every year and see what's going on there, because after all, we are in a sparsely populated area of the country to run the largest arcade in the world. It's almost unheard of. Most people can't even believe that a place of this size could be in this community of Laconia with 16,000 people. But we've done it through the tourist industry. We're doing a series of radio ads right now. We do a lot of print advertising. And in owning the Weir's Times newspaper, of course, we can put anything we want in there. And we've done some TV advertising, although we don't are big on it. And I think today any business has to depend on the internet to advertise, as we do with all of our different sites we have. And I would mention again about the party room, because I think it's been one of the best moves that Funspot has ever made, because people can do what they want to for their own party. And it's not just birthdays, it's any kind of a get-together, sports teams, or whatever you want. And we don't charge anything. Other people in the industry think we're nuts, but I can tell you it's the best move we've made. We used to charge $10 a head, which most places do for a birthday party, or 15. You bring 20 kids in, you got $200 right there before you enter the door. And a lot of people can't afford that today. So they can come in here, and I don't care if they spend a cent, it doesn't matter to me, because kids got to have a birthday party. And obviously I know they're going to spend some money, but they don't have to. It's not required, and I don't care whether they do or not. People just love it, and it's word of mouth that's developed that in these 6 years or so, that we're just looking to see what we can do to get some more space. We may put another addition on here, just for a party room. That's the way it's going.